The rain hammered against the windows of the Brookline estate as Margaret Sullivan stared at the wedding band on her finger, a prop that felt heavier with each passing day. Outside, thunder rolled across Boston Harbor like distant artillery, a sound that took her back to battlefields she'd rather forget. They say time heals all wounds. They lie. 5 years since she'd buried her husband, and the question still burned: who had betrayed him, and why now she found herself in another man's house, wearing another man's ring, chasing ghosts and conspiracies that powerful men had spent years burying. Some games have rules only the dead understand, her new husband had told her last night, his eyes haunted by his own ghosts. She hadn't signed up for a marriage, even a false one. She'd signed up for vengeance, for truth, for justice. But as the storm outside intensified, she couldn't ignore the dangerous truth forming in her heart. This arrangement, built on convenience and desperation, was becoming something neither of them had anticipated. Something real. The January wind cut through Margaret Sullivan's wool coat as she scanned the perimeter of the Boston Convention Center. Her earpiece crackled with updates from her security team positioned throughout the sprawling Tech Secure Expo. "Alpha Team, East Entrance clear," came a voice in her ear. "Copy that," Maggie responded, her breath visible in the cold air. At 54, she carried herself with the unmistakable vigilance of someone who'd spent 2 decades in the FBI. 5 years into private security work hadn't softened her edges. She checked her watch. The keynote presentation by Harrington Technologies would begin in 30 minutes, and something felt off. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up the same sensation that had saved her life more times than she could count. "Jenkins, sweep the service corridors again," she ordered into her comm. "Chen, I want another pass through the catering staff." Maggie moved through the crowd with practiced ease, cataloging faces, noticing details. A man with a visitor badge but familiarity with the security guards. A woman taking photos of exit points rather than exhibits. Small inconsistencies that might mean nothing or everything. Her phone vibrated with a text from her son. "Good luck today. Mom, don't intimidate the tech nerds too much." She smiled briefly. At 28, Nathan had his father's sense of humor and her stubborn streak. The thought of her late husband brought the familiar dull ache in her chest. 5 years since James had died on that classified mission, and some days the loss still felt fresh. Pushing the memory aside, Maggie approached the VIP staging area where the event's headline speaker was reviewing his presentation. Victor Harrington cut an impressive figure even at 58 tall, with silver-streaked dark hair and the rigid posture of a military man who'd never quite returned to civilian stance. "Mr. Harrington," she greeted him with a professional nod. "Final security check before we open the doors." Victor looked up from his tablet, his gray eyes assessing her with the same analytical precision she'd used on the crowd. "Ms. Sullivan, your reputation precedes you." His voice carried the slight gravel of someone who'd spent years issuing commands. "Your company came highly recommended." "We aim to exceed expectations," she replied. "Any concerns about your presentation today?" Victor hesitated, something flashing behind his eyes. "Nothing specific, but I'd appreciate heightened vigilance. The quantum encryption system we're demonstrating has attracted attention." The understatement wasn't lost on Maggie. Harrington Technologies' breakthrough in cybersecurity had been front-page news for weeks. A quantum encryption method that could theoretically be unbreakable, a holy grail in the digital age. "Understood," she said. "I've doubled the team around the demonstration area. We've also swept for electronic surveillance 3 times since dawn." Victor nodded, seemingly satisfied. "In my experience, Ms. Sullivan, threats rarely announce themselves with convenient warning signs." "In mine as well, Mr. Harrington," she countered with a small smile. "That's why we plan for everything." Their eyes met in a moment of mutual recognition. Two veterans from different battlefields who understood that danger never really disappeared. It just changed form. "Maggie," her earpiece crackled urgently. "Security breach at loading dock C. Two guards down. Her body tensed as she immediately shifted to tactical mode. Lock down the keynote stage, she ordered, already moving. To Victor, she said, stay with my team. We have a situation. But Victor Harrington was already closing his tablet. What kind of situation? His tone had shifted from businessman to commander in an instant. The kind you should let my team handle, Maggie replied firmly. Drawing the compact Glock from her shoulder holster, Victor's eyes narrowed. It's my technology they're after. Before she could argue, the lights in the convention center flickered, then died, plunging the space into darkness. Emergency lights kicked on seconds later, casting an eerie blue glow across the suddenly panicked crowd. They've cut the power, Maggie muttered. This isn't amateur hour. She heard glass shattering from the direction of the exhibition floor, where the Harrington Technologies prototype was displayed. Making a split-second decision, she grabbed Victor's arm. This way, she said, leading him not toward the exits but through a service corridor. If they're after your tech, they'll expect you to evacuate with the crowd. Victor matched her pace effortlessly. You seem remarkably calm about this. Kunekrum. Panic is a luxury for people who don't carry firearms, Maggie replied, checking corners as they moved. You're not so nervous yourself for a CEO? I wasn't always a CEO, he said cryptically. They reached a maintenance stairwell, and Maggie gestured for him to follow. 3 flights down, she pressed her back against the wall and risked a quick glance through the small window in the door. The exhibition hall beyond was in chaos, people streaming toward exits while security tried to maintain order. Through the confusion, she spotted them 4 figures in black tactical gear, moving with military precision toward the Harrington display. 4 hostiles, she reported quietly. Professional. Moving to your exhibit. Victor's jaw tightened. The prototype is secured in a biometric safe, but given enough time. They won't have enough time, Maggie interrupted, checking her weapon. Stay here. Victor's hand closed around her wrist, surprisingly strong. Ms. Sullivan, with respect to your expertise, I'm not hiding in a stairwell while strangers steal my life's work. Something in his eyes, determination, anger, pride made Maggie reassess the man before her. Not just another tech executive with an inflated sense of self-importance, but someone who'd clearly faced danger before. Can you handle yourself? She asked bluntly. His smile was cold. Delta Force, retired, I can handle myself. Maggie nodded once. Stay behind me. Watch our 6. If I say run, you run. Clear a crystal. They moved through the door and into the chaos of the exhibition hall. Maggie led them along the perimeter, using display booths for cover. Most of the civilians had evacuated, leaving an eerily empty space where thousands had gathered minutes before. They reached the Harrington Technologies display just as one of the attackers was connecting equipment to the sleek black safe containing the prototype. Maggie took a defensive position behind a pillar. Weapon ready. Sullivan Security, she called out clearly. Step away from the equipment. Police are en route. The response was immediate gunfire spraying in their direction, forcing them back behind cover. Maggie returned fire precisely, dropping one attacker with a shot to the leg. They're not here to negotiate, Victor observed dryly, producing a handgun from beneath his jacket. So much for the mild-mannered CEO, Maggie muttered. Cover me. Victor provided suppressing fire while Maggie moved to a better position, taking down a second attacker with 2 center mass shots. The remaining 2 grabbed what looked like a portable hard drive from the safe and began retreating toward a service exit. They've got something, Victor said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Not for long, Maggie replied, already in pursuit. They chased the attackers through the service corridors and out onto the loading dock, where an unmarked van waited. Engine running, Maggie took aim at the tires, firing twice and catching the rear wheel. The van swerved but kept moving, speeding away from the convention center. Victor was already running toward a black SUV parked nearby. Get in, he called to Maggie. Unless you're willing to let them walk away with national security secrets. Maggie hesitated only briefly before climbing into the passenger seat. Protocol dictated she secure the scene, coordinate with law enforcement, ensure her client's safety. But something in Victor's urgency compelled her to follow a different instinct. The SUV roared to life, and Victor drove with the skill of someone who'd done tactical pursuit training. They followed the damaged van through Boston streets, weaving through traffic with dangerous precision. "You want to tell me what they actually stole?" Maggie asked, bracing herself as Victor took a corner at speed. "The encryption key architecture," he replied grimly. "Not the complete system, but enough to compromise it if they have the right resources." "And who are they exactly?" Victor's eyes remained fixed on the escaping van. "If I had to guess, Meridian Group." The name sent a chill down Maggie's spine. Meridian, a private intelligence firm with tentacles in corporate espionage, defense contracting, and darker operations that never made the news. Run by Lawrence Reynolds, a former CIA director whose ethical flexibility was legendary in intelligence circles. "You've had run-ins with them before," she observed. Victor's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You could say that." The van ahead of them swerved toward the harbor, clearly aiming for the industrial port area where escape by water would be possible. Victor anticipated the move, cutting down a side street to head them off. They emerged onto the waterfront road just as the van crashed through a security gate leading to the docks. Victor followed, the SUV's powerful engine closing the distance. "They're heading for that yacht." Maggie pointed to a sleek vessel where figures were already moving on deck. Victor nodded grimly. "Not if we can help it." He accelerated, pulling alongside the damaged van just as it reached the pier. The driver swerved, trying to force them off the narrow roadway and into the water. Victor countered expertly, maintaining control. Maggie rolled down her window and fired at the van's remaining tires. The vehicle swerved violently, then flipped, rolling several times before coming to rest on its side. The stolen drive skittered across the concrete pier. Before the SUV had fully stopped, Victor was out the door, sprinting toward the overturned van. Maggie followed, covering him as figures on the yacht began firing in their direction. Victor dove for the drive, snatching it up while Maggie provided covering fire. They retreated to the SUV under a hail of bullets, glass shattering around them. "Go!" Maggie shouted as they both tumbled into the vehicle. Victor reversed at speed, then spun the SUV around, accelerating away from the pier as the yacht's engines roared to life. "They're getting away," Maggie noted, watching the vessel begin to move. "They didn't get what they came for," Victor replied, holding up the drive. "That's what matters." As the adrenaline began to fade, Maggie became acutely aware that she'd just engaged in a shootout and high-speed chase with a man she'd met less than an hour ago. A man who clearly was more than the tech CEO his public profile suggested. "So," she said as Victor navigated them back toward the city. "Delta Force." He glanced at her with the ghost of a smile. "An FBI. I'm guessing not just private security. 20 years counterterrorism and organized crime. Retired 5 years ago." Victor nodded. "Family. One son, grown, widowed." She kept her tone matter of fact. "You. 2 children, daughter in medical school, son working in London. Wife died of cancer 8 years ago." The simple exchange of personal information felt oddly intimate after the shared intensity of combat. Maggie found herself studying his profile, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship, the set of his jaw that suggested he was accustomed to carrying responsibilities alone. "You handled yourself well back there," he said, breaking the silence. "You're not what I expected from a tech executive," she countered. Victor's expression darkened slightly. "The battlefield changes, Ms. Sullivan. The war doesn't." Before she could ask what war he was fighting, her phone rang the Boston Police Department calling for a statement about the convention center attack. Reality came flooding back, along with the professional consequences of abandoning her post to chase armed suspects with a client. "I need to deal with this," she sighed, answering the call. The next several hours were a blur of police statements, client reassurances, and damage control. By the time Maggie returned to her office in a converted brownstone near Boston Common, evening had fallen and exhaustion pulled at her bones. She was reviewing the incident report when her office door opened, revealing her second-in-command, Michael Jenkins, a former Army Ranger with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and unwavering loyalty. "Boss, you've got a visitor," he said, his expression suggesting he'd already made his opinion of said visitor clear. "I'm not seeing anyone tonight. Jenkins, whatever it is can wait until—" "I'm afraid it can't. Ms. Sullivan." Victor Harrington stood in the doorway behind Jenkins, still in the same suit he'd worn during the attack, though somehow looking unruffled despite the day's events. "Mr. Harrington," Maggie acknowledged, signaling Jenkins that it was okay to leave them. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," Victor replied, taking the seat opposite her desk without waiting for an invitation. "But after today's events, I believe we have matters to discuss." Maggie leaned back in her chair, studying him. The controlled urgency in his bearing suggested this wasn't a social call. "If you're worried about Sullivan Securities' liability for the attack, our contract has clear provisions for—" "I'm not here about liability," Victor interrupted. "I'm here because what happened today wasn't random. It wasn't opportunistic. It was targeted, professional, and it will happen again." "You're that certain Meridian was behind it?" Victor's expression hardened. "I'm certain Lawrence Reynolds has been trying to acquire my encryption technology for over a year. Today's attempt was just the most direct approach so far." Maggie's instincts sharpened. "And why would the former CIA director be so interested in your encryption system?" "Because it would give whoever controls it unprecedented access to secure communications worldwide." Victor leaned forward. "In the right hands, it protects privacy and ensures security. In the wrong hands, it becomes the perfect surveillance tool," Maggie finished. The implications were chilling. Victor nodded grimly. "Reynolds has connections to foreign intelligence services that would pay billions for this technology. And he has informants inside my company. You're sure the attackers knew exactly when and where to strike. They had details about security protocols that aren't public knowledge." His jaw tightened. "Someone close to me is feeding information to Meridian." Maggie considered this. Corporate espionage wasn't new territory for her, but the stakes here seemed unusually high. "So what are you proposing, Mr. Harrington?" "I want to hire Sullivan Security, specifically you, for a comprehensive counterintelligence operation. Find the leak in my organization, secure the technology, and help me complete the final phase of development before Meridian can steal it." The directness of the request surprised her. "That's not exactly our standard service package." "I'm not looking for standard service. Ms. Sullivan, I'm looking for someone with the experience and skills to handle a threat of this magnitude." Victor held her gaze. "Your FBI background, particularly in counterterrorism, makes you uniquely qualified." Maggie narrowed her eyes. "You've been investigating me. Would you have done any differently in my position?" he countered. She conceded the point with a slight nod. "Why me specifically? Boston has no shortage of security firms with former intelligence personnel." Victor was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Because you have no connections to Lawrence Reynolds or his organization. Because your record at the Bureau was exemplary. And because I saw how you handled yourself today. You think clearly under pressure, and you're not intimidated by powerful people or dangerous situations." The assessment was accurate, if flattering, but Maggie sensed there was more he wasn't saying. "And," she prompted, Victor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "And because you lost your husband to an operation that may have had Meridian connections?" The statement hit Maggie like a physical blow. James's death had been classified, the details sparse even to her. Heart racing, she kept her voice deliberately calm. "Explain." "I can't prove it yet," Victor said, his voice softening slightly. "But I have reason to believe that the mission your husband died on was compromised by intelligence that passed through Reynolds' hands." Maggie's mind raced. For 5 years, she'd accepted the official explanation that James's death was an operational casualty, a mission gone wrong in a volatile region. The suggestion that there might have been more to it, that someone might be responsible, sent anger coursing through her veins. If you're manipulating me with speculative information about my husband's death to secure my services, Mr. Harrington, you should walk out that door right now. I understand your skepticism, Victor replied steadily. I'm not offering certainty, only possibility, and access to resources that might help you find answers the government wasn't willing to provide. Maggie studied him, looking for signs of deception. She found none, only the steady gaze of a man who understood exactly what he was offering and what it would mean to her. I'll need complete access, she said finally. Your facilities, personnel records, communications, no restrictions. Done. And triple our standard rate. Victor didn't even blink. Agreed. I'll need a team of my choosing. Whatever you require. The ease of his acquiescence should have been suspicious, but Maggie's instincts told her his urgency was genuine. Whatever game Victor Harrington was playing, he believed the threat was real. One last thing, she said. Complete honesty between us, no hidden agendas, no withheld information. I need to know everything you know about Meridian, Reynolds, and any connection to my husband. Something flickered in Victor's eyes, hesitation, perhaps, or resignation. Agreed, he said finally, though some of what I know isn't pleasant. Pleasant stopped being a priority for me a long time ago. Mr. Harrington. Victor nodded once, then rose to his feet, extending his hand. Then we have a deal. Miss Sullivan. Maggie stood and shook his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of a man who'd done more than sign documents in his life. Call me Maggie, she said. If we're going to war together, we might as well be on a first-name basis. His smile was thin but genuine. Victor. Then, as he turned to leave, Maggie called after him. You never actually answered my question from earlier. What war are you fighting? Victor. He paused at the door, his shoulders set with the weight of a burden carried too long alone. The same one you are. Maggie. Justice for the dead and protection for the living. The simple declaration resonated with something deep in her core, the driving force that had sustained her through grief and beyond. Whatever Victor Harrington's secrets, they shared at least this common purpose. After he left, Maggie sat alone in her office, staring at the photo of James on her desk. Her late husband smiled back at her, frozen in time 5 years ago, unaware of what awaited him on his final mission. What were you involved in? James, she whispered to the empty room. And what am I getting myself into now? The question hung unanswered in the silence. 2 days later, Maggie stood in Victor's private office on the top floor of the Harrington Technologies headquarters, watching rain streak down the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Boston Harbor. The space reflected its owner, elegant but functional, with the only personal touches being photos of his children and a shadow box containing military medals on a side wall. Your security infrastructure has more holes than a fishing net, she said without preamble as Victor entered the room. Remote access protocols are outdated. The biometric system doesn't log failed attempts, and your executive elevator requires only a key card, no secondary authentication. Victor set down the files he was carrying. Good morning to you too, Maggie. Is it? She challenged. Because I've identified 14 separate vulnerabilities that Meridian could exploit to access your research facilities, and those are just the physical weaknesses. I take it Jenkins and your team have been busy. Very. Maggie handed him a tablet displaying a detailed security assessment. The good news is that your actual research lab has decent protection. The bad news is everything surrounding it might as well have a welcome mat for industrial espionage. Victor scanned the report, his expression growing more troubled with each swipe. Some of these vulnerabilities are recent changes to our security protocols, changes I didn't authorize, which supports your theory about an inside man, Maggie noted. Someone's been systematically weakening your defenses. The question is, who has the authority to make these changes? A very short list, Victor replied. My head of security, my CTO, and my executive assistant. I'll need to interview each of them. Discreetly, Victor nodded, but his attention had shifted to something outside the window. Following his gaze, Maggie spotted a sleek black sedan pulling up to the building's entrance. We have another problem, he said quietly. One I didn't anticipate quite so soon. What kind of problem? The investment board that controls my family trust is making an unscheduled visit. Victor's jaw tightened. Led by my late father's oldest friend and executor of his will, Judge William Blackwood. Before Maggie could ask why this constituted a problem, Victor's assistant buzzed through the intercom. Mr. Harrington, Judge Blackwood and the trust committee are here for you. Send them up. Angela, Victor replied, then turned to Maggie. I need you to stay for this meeting. Why family trust matters aren't part of our agreement. They're about to be, Victor said cryptically. Just trust me on this. Before Maggie could press further, the office door opened to admit 5 people, 4 men and 1 woman, all in their 60s or 70s, dressed in the understated expensive clothing of old Boston money. The man in the lead, Judge Blackwood, Maggie presumed approached Victor with the confidence of long acquaintance. Tall and distinguished with snow-white hair and piercing blue eyes, he carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to respect. Victor, he greeted, embracing the younger man briefly. You're looking well, despite the excitement I hear you had at the tech exhibition. News travels fast, Victor observed. In certain circles, yes. The judge's gaze shifted to Maggie, assessing her with polite interest. And who might this be? Victor made the introduction smoothly. Judge William Blackwood, this is Margaret Sullivan, head of the security firm I've engaged following the attempted theft. Maggie, Judge Blackwood was my father's closest friend and serves as head of the Harrington Trust Committee. Maggie shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the shrewd intelligence behind the cordial smile. A pleasure, Your Honor. Likewise, Ms. Sullivan, though I'm surprised to find you in what we expected to be a private financial meeting. Before Maggie could excuse herself, Victor interjected, Maggie's presence is relevant to the matters at hand. I assume this unexpected visit concerns the Archer Clause. Something passed between Victor and the judge, an old tension or unresolved argument. Indeed, Blackwood confirmed. The committee has become concerned about the timeline, especially in light of recent security incidents. Victor gestured for everyone to sit at the conference table in the corner of his office. Maggie took a seat slightly apart from the group, observing the dynamics. The committee members deferred to Blackwood, while Victor maintained a careful politeness that suggested the relationship was complicated. As you know, Blackwood began once everyone was settled. Your father's will contains specific conditions regarding control of both the company and the family trust. I'm intimately familiar with my father's conditions, Victor replied, an edge creeping into his voice. Then you're also aware that the deadline is approaching. 6 months from now, your 60th birthday will trigger the Archer Clause unless you fulfill the requirements. And the committee is here to what remind me of the calendar. Victor's tone remained even, but Maggie caught the subtle tension in his posture. Blackwood sighed. We're here because the trust's financial advisor has raised concerns about the stability of Harrington Technologies given recent events. The attempted theft of your encryption technology has made the investment committee nervous. My technology is secure, Victor stated firmly, but is your position countered a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses? If you lose control of the company under the Archer Clause, the entire project could be restructured or sold off. Victor's face hardened. That's not going to happen. Then you've addressed the marriage requirement, Blackwood asked, his tone softening slightly. Victor, you know I was never in favor of that condition, but your father was adamant. The Harrington legacy, in his view, required familial stability. Maggie stiffened in her chair. Marriage requirement. She looked at Victor, whose expression had become carefully neutral. I'm handling it, William, Victor said firmly. 6 months isn't much time to find a suitable partner and establish the stable marriage the clause requires, the lone woman on the committee observed. Especially for someone as particular as you, Victor. With respect, Ms. Winters, my personal life isn't up for committee review. Blackwood intervened smoothly. No one is questioning your personal choices. Victor, we're simply expressing concern about the timeline. If you fail to meet the conditions by your 60th birthday, control of both the company and the trust transfers to the foundation, given the national security implications of your current project, that outcome seems problematic for everyone. The implications became clear to Maggie as she listened. Victor needed to be married within 6 months to maintain control of his company and access to what must be significant trust assets. The timing aligned perfectly with his urgency to complete the encryption system before Meridian could steal it. The committee would be willing to consider alternatives. Blackwood continued. Perhaps an extension or modification of the terms. That won't be necessary, Victor interrupted. His decision apparently made, he looked directly at Maggie, something apologetic yet determined in his gaze. I've already addressed the situation. Maggie felt a sudden wariness at the direction this was heading. Oh, Blackwood's eyebrows rose. You've been holding out on us. Victor. Who's the fortunate person? After a moment's hesitation that only Maggie seemed to notice, Victor said, You've already met her. Margaret Sullivan and I have been seeing each other privately for some time. The statement landed in the room like a physical object, heavy and unavoidable. Maggie maintained her professional composure through years of training. But inside, alarms were blaring. Whatever game Victor was playing, he just pulled her onto the field without warning. Blackwood looked between them, surprise evident on his face. Well, this is unexpected. Congratulations would seem to be in order. The other committee members appeared equally startled, exchanging glances that ranged from skeptical to curious. Thank you, Victor said smoothly. We've been keeping things private, given the sensitive nature of both our work. Maggie remained silent, watching Victor dig himself deeper with each word. Part of her wanted to contradict him immediately. Another part, the investigator wanted to see where this charade led. And are there plans for formalization? Blackwood asked delicately. The clause is quite specific about legal marriage, not just a relationship. Victor glanced at Maggie, something almost pleading in his eyes. Perhaps this isn't the appropriate forum to discuss our personal timeline. Of course, forgive me. Blackwood backtracked. This is certainly positive news for the committee. We'll look forward to updates as things progress. The meeting concluded shortly after, with assurances that the technology project remained on schedule despite the security breach. Maggie maintained a neutral expression throughout, offering nothing to either support or contradict Victor's claim. As the committee members filed out, Blackwood lingered behind. Once they were alone, his cordial demeanor shifted to something more candid. Victor, he said quietly, I've known you since you were 10 years old. I'm not going to pry into the authenticity of what you just presented, but as your father's friend, I feel obligated to remind you that the clause requires a genuine marriage. The Foundation's lawyers will scrutinize any sudden relationship that conveniently resolves this issue. I'm aware of the legal parameters. William, Victor replied stiffly. Blackwood turned to Maggie. Ms. Sullivan, whatever arrangement exists between you and Victor, I hope you understand the complexities involved. The Harrington legacy carries significant responsibilities and complications. I appreciate the concern, Your Honor, Maggie replied neutrally. With a final searching look between them, Blackwood departed, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. The moment the door closed, Maggie turned to Victor, her expression dangerous. Want to explain what just happened? Victor had the good grace to look uncomfortable. I apologize for the ambush. It wasn't planned. You just told a federal judge and 4 corporate executives That we're in a relationship, Maggie said evenly. That goes well beyond our agreed parameters. I know. Victor ran a hand through his hair, the first genuinely flustered gesture she'd seen from him. It was an impulse decision based on their unexpected visit. An impulse decision, Maggie repeated flatly. Perhaps you should explain this Archer clause and why you felt it necessary to drag me into your family drama. Victor sighed, moving to the window and looking out at the harbor. For a moment, he seemed older, the weight of something heavy on his shoulders. My father was a brilliant businessman and a terrible father, he began. He built Harrington Technologies from nothing, but his personal life was tumultuous. 3 marriages, numerous affairs. When he wrote his will, he included what the family lawyers call the Archer Clause, named after his own father, who had similar views on legacy, which stipulates what, exactly, that to maintain control of both the company and the family trust assets, I must be in a stable and legally recognized marriage by my 60th birthday. Victor turned back to face her. If I fail to meet that condition, control of the company transfers to the Harrington Foundation, and the trust assets, approximately $500 million, go into a restricted fund I can't access. Maggie absorbed this information, the pieces clicking into place. And you need those resources to complete the encryption project before Meridian can steal it. The final phase of development requires specialized equipment and security measures that would be impossible to fund through normal corporate channels without raising red flags. Victor confirmed. Not to mention the foundation board includes several people with connections to Lawrence Reynolds. So if you lose control, Meridian potentially gains access? Exactly. Victor's expression was grim. The encryption project isn't just about business. Maggie, it's about national security. In the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon of unprecedented surveillance capability. Maggie paced the office, processing the implications. And your solution to this problem is to claim you're in a relationship with me, the security consultant you hired 3 days ago. It wasn't planned, Victor repeated. But when Blackwood started pressing about the timeline, it seemed like a potential solution. A solution, Maggie echoed. You're suggesting a fraudulent marriage to retain control of your company and trust fund. I'm suggesting a mutually beneficial arrangement, Victor countered. A temporary partnership with clear parameters and significant compensation. Maggie stared at him incredulously. You want to pay me to be your fake wife? I want to hire your exceptional skills for an extended security operation that includes maintaining appearances to satisfy the trust conditions, he corrected. The marriage would be legally valid but functionally a business arrangement. Limited term, complete financial independence, separate living arrangements if you prefer. You're insane, Maggie stated flatly. I'm pragmatic, Victor replied, and I'm running out of options. Meridian is closing in on my technology. I have a mole in my organization, and I'm facing an arbitrary deadline that could hand control of everything to people who might be compromised. Find someone else for the marriage part, Maggie suggested. I'll handle the security and counterintelligence. Victor shook his head. The trust lawyers would investigate any sudden relationship. They discover the deception and invalidate the arrangement. You, however, have a legitimate professional reason to be in my life. Your background is impeccable, your reputation unimpeachable. We could construct a narrative about a professional relationship that evolved naturally. Into a marriage of convenience, Maggie finished dryly. Into a strategic partnership, Victor corrected. One that gives you unprecedented access to investigate Meridian's operations and potentially uncover the truth about your husband's death. The mention of James hit its mark. Maggie felt the familiar ache, accompanied now by the burning need to know if Victor's insinuations about a connection to Meridian were true. That's manipulative, she observed, though without heat. It's honest, Victor countered. I need your help, and I'm offering resources in exchange. Resources that might provide answers you've been seeking for 5 years. Maggie moved to the window, watching the rain fall on the harbor. The proposal was absurd, unethical, potentially illegal. Yet beneath the professional outrage, another emotion stirred curiosity, perhaps, or the investigator's instinct that the fastest way to the truth was often through the heart of the storm. If I were to consider this insanity, she said slowly, I would need conditions of my own. Victor's expression remained carefully neutral, such as complete autonomy in the security investigation, unlimited access to your research, communications, personnel, total transparency about your history with Meridian and any connection to my husband. Granted, financial terms that acknowledge the personal nature of the deception, $10 million in an escrow account. Released to me when the arrangement concludes. Victor didn't even blink at the figure. Acceptable. And a comprehensive exit strategy with all necessary legal protections once your birthday deadline passes. I'll have the attorneys draft the documents immediately. Maggie turned to face him fully. You're agreeing rather quickly to significant demands. Because time is something I don't have, Victor replied simply. And because what I'm asking goes beyond normal professional boundaries. The compensation should reflect that. A rational voice in Maggie's mind screamed that this was madness, a bizarre proposal from a man she barely knew, involving deception at levels that could damage her professional reputation irreparably if discovered. But another part, the part that had driven her through 20 years of FBI work and the long darkness after James's death, recognized the opportunity this presented. Access to resources and information she could never obtain independently. A position that would allow her to investigate Meridian from the inside. And yes, a chance to uncover the truth about James's final mission. I need 24 hours to consider, she said finally. Victor nodded, seemingly relieved she hadn't rejected the idea outright. Of course, as Maggie gathered her things to leave, he added, for what it's worth, I wouldn't have suggested this if I didn't respect you enormously, both professionally and personally. Flattery won't help your case, Mr. Harrington, Maggie replied, though without real anger. I'll contact you tomorrow with my decision. That evening, Maggie sat in her home office, surrounded by research. Her dining table was covered with printouts, everything she could find on Meridian Group, Lawrence Reynolds, the Harrington Family Trust, and Victor himself. The more she dug, the more complex the picture became. Reynolds had indeed transitioned from CIA to private sector with remarkable speed, building Meridian into a powerhouse that straddled the line between legitimate intelligence consulting and something darker. The company had connections to operations in regions where James had worked, though nothing directly linking them to his final mission. Victor's history was equally intriguing. His military record was partially redacted, suggesting special operations beyond standard Delta Force deployment. After leaving the service, he'd taken over the family business from his father and transformed it from a conventional defense contractor into a cutting-edge technology firm specializing in cybersecurity. What stood out most was a 6-month period 15 years ago when both men, Reynolds and Victor, had been in Afghanistan at the same time. Reynolds as CIA station chief, Victor on a classified Delta mission. Something had happened during that deployment, something significant enough that Victor had resigned his commission shortly after returning home. The doorbell interrupted her research, checking the security camera. Maggie was surprised to see Michael Jenkins on her porch, looking more serious than usual. It's almost midnight. Jenkins, she said as she opened the door. This better be important. Got something you need to see, boss, he replied, handing her a flash drive. Something about your new client that didn't show up in the standard background check. Inside, Jenkins declined a drink, his expression unusually grave as Maggie connected the drive to her laptop. What am I looking at? She asked as files appeared on the screen. Classified mission reports from Afghanistan, 2010, special operations targeting terrorist financing networks. Jenkins, who'd served 3 tours in the region, watched her face carefully. Your husband was intelligence support on the mission where Harrington's team was ambushed. Maggie's blood ran cold as she scanned the documents. Operation Shadowcast. She recognized the code name from the sparse details she'd received after James's death. but these documents contained information she'd never seen before. "How did you get these?" she asked, voice tight. "Still have contacts in military intelligence," Jenkins replied. "Called in some favors after you mentioned Harrington's insinuations about Meridian's connection to James's death." The mission details painted a grim picture. Victor's Delta team, working with CIA intelligence provided by James and others, had raided a compound believed to house financial records for a terrorist network. Instead, they'd walked into a trap. 3 operators killed, Victor severely wounded. The intelligence had been wrong or compromised. James wasn't on the ground, Maggie noted, reading further. "He was providing remote analysis." Jenkins nodded. "But according to these reports, he flagged concerns about the intelligence reliability hours before the raid. His warnings were overruled by Station Chief Lawrence Reynolds." The revelation hit Maggie like a physical blow. James had seen problems with the intelligence and had been ignored by Reynolds, the same man now running Meridian, the same man targeting Victor's technology. "There's more," Jenkins said quietly. 5 years ago, the mission that killed James, he was investigating a possible connection between Reynolds and unauthorized intelligence transfers to foreign entities. Maggie looked up sharply. "You're saying James was investigating Reynolds for treason?" "Not officially," Jenkins clarified. "Off books. He'd found something connecting Reynolds to leaked intelligence that got Harrington's men killed in Afghanistan. The working theory among some of my contacts is that James got too close to something Reynolds wanted buried. The implications were staggering. If true, it suggested that Reynolds had been involved in compromising the mission that wounded Victor, and later had something to do with James's death. It created a connection between the 3 of them that went far beyond their current circumstances. "Why didn't this come out in the official investigation?" Maggie demanded. Reynolds had moved to the private sector by then, but still had powerful friends in the intelligence community. Jenkins explained. "The official finding was that James died in a standard operation gone wrong. No mention of Reynolds or any unauthorized investigation." Maggie closed the laptop, her mind racing. The information transformed Victor's proposal from an absurd business proposition to something far more complex, an opportunity to investigate connections that might lead to the truth about James's death. "There's one more thing," Jenkins added reluctantly. "Harrington has been investigating Reynolds independently for years. He believes Reynolds is the Fox, a code name for a high-level intelligence operative who sold out multiple operations to foreign interests." "You think that's why he approached me specifically?" Maggie asked. "Because of my connection to James." Jenkins shrugged. "Can't say for sure, but it seems like more than coincidence." After Jenkins left, Maggie returned to her research with renewed focus. If Victor suspected Reynolds was this Fox character, and if Reynolds had connections to James's death, then Victor's encryption technology and the marriage proposal weren't just about business. They were part of a larger strategy to draw Reynolds out. By dawn, Maggie had made her decision. She called Victor's private number, not surprised when he answered immediately despite the early hour. "I have conditions," she said without preamble. "Many more than I outlined yesterday, but if you agree to them, I'll consider your proposal." "Name them," Victor replied, his voice revealing nothing. "Full disclosure about Operation Shadowcast and your history with Reynolds? Everything you know about the Fox and any connection to my husband's death?" There was a pause, surprise, perhaps, that she'd uncovered these connections so quickly. "Agreed," he said finally. "I maintain my own residence and private life. The arrangement is for public and legal purposes only. Of course, I select the team that knows the truth about our arrangement. No one else is to be informed of the deception." "Understood. And most importantly," Maggie concluded, "this isn't just about your technology or trust fund. This becomes a joint operation to investigate Reynolds, Meridian, and any connection to what happened to James. That's non-negotiable." Victor's response was immediate and sincere. "That was always my intention. Maggie, finding the truth about the Fox has been my mission for 15 years. If that's Reynolds, and if he's connected to your husband's death, Then our goals are already aligned. Maggie took a deep breath, still scarcely believing what she was agreeing to. Then we have a deal, Mr. Harrington. God help us both. Indeed, Victor replied softly. I believe we may need it. The agreement was formalized with remarkable efficiency. Within a week, Maggie found herself reviewing legal documents that outlined what had to be the most unusual business arrangement of her career. A marriage contract disguised as prenuptial agreement, with clauses covering everything from financial independence to investigation parameters to dissolution terms. Everything is in order, confirmed Eleanor Kraft, the silver-haired attorney Maggie had brought in as her personal counsel. One of the few people aware of the arrangement's true nature, Eleanor had been James's cousin and was absolutely trustworthy. Though I maintain this is the most unorthodox case I've handled in 40 years of practice. Not exactly how I pictured getting married again, Maggie admitted, signing the final document. Eleanor's expression softened. James would understand. You know, if this helps you find the truth about what happened to him, it's not just about James, Maggie insisted, though not entirely convincingly. It's about national security. Victor's encryption technology could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Of course, Eleanor agreed diplomatically. Though I've noticed you've started calling him Victor rather than Mr. Harrington. Maggie ignored the observation, gathering the signed documents. The ceremony is tomorrow, small, private, at Judge Blackwood's home. He's agreed to officiate, which apparently satisfies the trust requirements for legitimacy. And after that, I become Mrs. Harrington in public while continuing to investigate Meridian and the mole in Victor's organization. Maggie shook her head slightly. Just another day in the life of a private security consultant. Eleanor chuckled. If you say so, dear, just be careful. These arrangements have a way of becoming complicated when real lives and emotions are involved. This is strictly professional, Maggie assured her, with perhaps too much emphasis. Victor and I both understand the parameters. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Maggie's phone buzzed with a text from Victor's security breach at the lab. Need you immediately? Speaking of professional obligations, Maggie said, gathering her things. Duty calls. She arrived at Harrington Technologies 20 minutes later to find the research building in lockdown. Security personnel and Boston police officers moved purposefully through the lobby as Maggie flashed her credentials and headed for the executive elevator. Victor was waiting when the doors opened, his expression tight with controlled anger. Someone accessed the secure server room at 3 a.m., he said without preamble, bypassed 6 separate security measures and copied research files. Your mole is getting bolder, Maggie observed, following him down the corridor to the security center. Or more desperate. They took the preliminary testing data for the quantum encryption keys, Victor explained as they entered the monitoring room where several technicians worked at computer stations. Not the complete architecture, but enough to give Meridian insight into our approach. Show me the security footage, Maggie requested. One of the technicians brought up video showing a darkened server room. The timestamp indicated 3:14 a.m. when a figure in a maintenance uniform entered, face carefully angled away from cameras. The intruder moved with practiced efficiency, accessing a terminal and connecting a device to download files. They knew exactly where the cameras were positioned, Maggie noted, and they had valid credentials to access the server room. That limits our suspect pool considerably. 23 people have that level of access, Victor confirmed, including my head of security, who conveniently called in sick today. Bradford. Maggie had interviewed the man just days earlier, former military, competent but unremarkable. Nothing that had flagged him as suspicious. I've dispatched Jenkins to locate him, Victor said grimly, but I suspect he's already gone. If Bradford is the mole, why make such an obvious move now? Maggie wondered aloud. He had to know the data breach would be discovered. Because something has changed, Victor suggested. Something that makes Meridian willing to burn their inside man. The implications were troubling. If Meridian was accelerating their timeline, it suggested they had information Victor didn't, perhaps about government interest in the encryption technology or competitive development from another company. We need to move up our own schedule, Maggie decided. Starting with making our arrangement official, the sooner you secure access to the trust assets, the sooner you can complete the final phase of development. Victor looked at her with surprise. You're suggesting we proceed with the wedding immediately, even with this security breach? Especially because of it, Maggie replied. This isn't just about maintaining your control of the company anymore. It's about completing the technology before Meridian can use what they've stolen. Understanding dawned in Victor's eyes. You think they're close to reverse engineering our approach? I think we can't afford to assume they're not, Maggie said. Call Judge Blackwood. Tell him we want to move forward today. Victor studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'll make the arrangements. As he stepped away to make the call, Maggie turned back to the security footage, watching the intruder's movements with narrowed eyes. Something about the figure's physicality seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. She requested the technician isolate and enhance several frames. Her phone rang. Jenkins calling with an update. Bradford's apartment is empty, he reported. Looks like he left in a hurry. Neighbors say a car picked him up around 4 a.m. Description: black sedan, tinted windows. No plate visible on building cameras. Professional extraction, Maggie observed. Any sign of where he might have gone? Nothing obvious, but I found something interesting in his trash. Torn-up receipt from Logan Airport parking garage, dated 3 days ago. He met someone at the airport. Get the airport security footage, Maggie instructed. Let's see who Bradford was meeting. As she ended the call, Victor returned, his expression unreadable. Judge Blackwood has agreed to perform the ceremony at his home at 6 p.m. today, he reported. He seemed surprised by the urgency but didn't question it. 6 hours, Maggie noted. Just enough time to be kidnapped by second thoughts. The attempt at humor fell flat as Victor's gaze shifted to the enhanced security images on the screen. His body tensed visibly. That's not Bradford, he said quietly. Maggie looked at the grainy image, the angle of the jaw, the posture, the way the figure held their hands. You recognize them? Victor's expression hardened. I need to check something. Meet me in my office in 30 minutes. Before she could question him further, he was gone, leaving Maggie staring at the security footage with growing unease. Whoever had accessed the server room moved with military precision and familiarity with the building's security systems, someone well-trained and well-informed. While waiting for Victor, Maggie called her son, Nathan. Hey, Mom, he answered, the sounds of a busy hospital in the background. As a surgical resident, his schedule was even more demanding than hers. Everything okay? You never call during the day. Everything's fine, she assured him. I just wanted to hear your voice. The partial truth hung between them. Maggie hadn't told Nathan about the arrangement with Victor, unsure how to explain such an unconventional decision to her straightforward son. You sure? Nathan pressed. You sound tense. Maggie sighed. Nathan had always been perceptive, even as a child. I'm about to make a complicated professional decision, she admitted, one that would have implications for us both. Does it help people? Potentially. Is it legal? Technically, yes. Will it make you happy? The question caught her off guard. Happy isn't really the relevant metric here. Nate, maybe it should be, he suggested gently. Mom, you've spent 5 years since Dad died focusing on everyone but yourself. Maybe it's time to consider what you want, not just what makes professional sense. Maggie was silent, absorbing her son's unexpected wisdom. Whatever it is, Nathan continued, I trust your judgment. You've never steered us wrong. After ending the call, Maggie found herself staring at her reflection in the glass wall of the corridor. At 54, she still maintained the fitness that had been required in the bureau, her dark hair now streaked with silver, laugh lines framing eyes that had seen too much sorrow in recent years. Not the typical blushing bride, certainly. When she reached Victor's office, She found him standing at the window, his posture rigid with tension. "The intruder," he said without turning around. It was Elizabeth Grant. The name meant nothing to Maggie. "Should I know who that is?" Victor turned, his expression grave. "My former sister-in-law, Catherine's younger sister. She worked for the CIA's Technical Services Division before moving to the private sector 5 years ago." "Around the time your wife died," Maggie noted. "Yes." Victor's jaw tightened. "Elizabeth and I were close once. She helped care for Catherine during her illness. After the funeral, she disappeared from our lives. I heard rumors she joined a private intelligence firm." "Meridian," Maggie guessed. Victor nodded grimly. "She would know this building's layout, know our security protocols, and she'd have the technical skills to bypass our systems." "Why would your sister-in-law help Reynolds target your technology?" Maggie asked, trying to fit this new piece into the puzzle. "That's what I can't figure out," Victor admitted. "Elizabeth loved Catherine. She was wonderful with our children. There was never any indication she had divided loyalties. Unless her loyalty was never to you in the first place," Maggie suggested carefully. "Could she have been working for Reynolds even back then?" The suggestion clearly pained Victor. "It would mean our entire family relationship was a lie. Or she was recruited after Catherine's death," Maggie offered. "People in grief are vulnerable to manipulation." Victor sank into his chair, suddenly looking every day of his 58 years. "If Elizabeth is working with Reynolds, it makes the situation even more dangerous. She knows me, knows how I think, and she has emotional leverage through my children." The personal dimension complicated an already complex situation. Maggie could see Victor reassessing everything in light of this betrayal by someone he'd once considered family. "We should postpone the wedding," he said finally. "This changes things. I can't ask you to step into what's become a personal vendetta." Maggie considered this, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Elizabeth Grant's involvement created new dangers, but it also provided an opportunity someone with direct connections to both Victor and Reynolds. "Actually," she said slowly, "this strengthens the case for proceeding. A public relationship between us gives you cover to continue the investigation while I work the Grant angle independently." "She won't expect you to pursue the matter with a new wife in the picture?" Victor looked up, studying her face. "You're not deterred by the personal complications." "I'm not deterred by much, Victor," Maggie replied honestly. "And I've spent 5 years trying to understand what happened to James. If Reynolds is connected, and if Grant is connected to Reynolds, then this is the closest I've come to answers." Something shifted in Victor's expression. Respect, perhaps, or relief at not facing these revelations alone. "6 o'clock, then," he said quietly. "Judge Blackwood's house in Beacon Hill." Maggie nodded, sealing the arrangement. "I'll be there. And Victor, wear something nice. If I'm getting married again, even under these circumstances, I refuse to be the better dressed one in the photos." His startled laugh broke the tension, a moment of unexpected lightness in the gravity of their situation. "I wouldn't dream of upstaging you, Ms. Sullivan," he replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Or should I start practicing Mrs. Harrington?" "Let's get through the ceremony first," Maggie advised dryly. "One impossible thing at a time." As she left his office, Maggie wondered what James would think of her marrying another man even temporarily, even as part of an investigation. The grief that had been her constant companion for 5 years shifted slightly, making room for something new. Not happiness, exactly, but purpose, a direction forward instead of the circular path of mourning. Judge Blackwood's Beacon Hill home was exactly what one would expect from a federal judge, with old Boston connections, a perfectly maintained brick townhouse with discreet security and elegant furnishings that had likely been in his family for generations. Maggie arrived precisely at 6, wearing a simple navy dress that she'd purchased years ago for a bureau commendation ceremony and never found occasion to wear since. Her hair was swept up, minimal makeup applied, a single strand of pearls that had been her mother's at her throat. She'd debated wearing her wedding ring from James, but had ultimately removed it, placing it in the jewelry box where it belonged with her past. Victor was waiting in the judge's study, looking unexpectedly distinguished in a charcoal suit that complemented his silver-streaked hair. Their eyes met as she entered, and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement of the strangeness of the moment, perhaps, or mutual recognition of the path they were committing to. "You look lovely," he said simply. "You clean up well yourself," she replied, falling back on humor to deflect the unexpected intimacy of the moment. Judge Blackwood entered with his wife, who would serve as the second witness alongside Eleanor. The older couple had the comfortable synchronicity of people who had spent decades together, and Maggie felt a pang of something like envy for that easy companionship. "Well," Blackwood said, looking between them with barely concealed curiosity, "shall we proceed with this rather hastily arranged ceremony?" The formalities were brief but legally binding. Standing before the judge in his wood-paneled study, Maggie and Victor exchanged the necessary vows, promises to honor and cherish that sounded strange coming from two people engaged in an elaborate deception. When Blackwood pronounced them husband and wife, there was an awkward moment when convention dictated a kiss. Victor hesitated, clearly unsure of the appropriate response given their arrangement. Maggie solved the dilemma by leaning forward and pressing a quick, business-like kiss to his lips, establishing the public narrative while maintaining professional boundaries. If she registered the unexpected warmth of the contact or the faint scent of his aftershave, she attributed it to the surreal nature of the situation. Papers were signed, congratulations offered, champagne poured. Through it all, Maggie maintained the poised exterior that had served her through countless undercover operations, while underneath, a voice whispered that this was madness of an entirely new order. "A toast," Judge Blackwood offered, raising his glass, "to Victor and Margaret Harrington. May your partnership bring you strength, wisdom, and joy in the years ahead." As they clinked glasses, Victor's eyes met Maggie's over the rim, something apologetic yet determined in his gaze. They both knew the years ahead would consist of however long it took to secure the trust assets, complete the encryption technology, and uncover the truth about Reynolds and James's death. After the brief reception, they departed together in Victor's car, a logical progression for newlyweds, though both knew Maggie would return to her own home later. "So," Victor said as they drove through the evening streets of Boston, "that happened." The understatement startled a genuine laugh from Maggie. "Indeed it did. Mr. Harrington, or should I say, husband." "God? That sounds strange," Victor admitted, though his tone was lighter than she'd expected. "I haven't been anyone's husband in 8 years, and I haven't been anyone's wife in 5, Maggie replied. "I suppose we're both a bit out of practice." They drove in companionable silence for a while, the reality of what they'd done settling around them. Eventually, Victor spoke again, his voice more serious. "Thank you, Maggie. I know this arrangement goes well beyond standard professional services. Just remember our agreement," she reminded him. "This is about finding answers about Reynolds, about Elizabeth Grant, about James. The trust funds and the encryption technology are important, but they're not my primary motivation." "I understand," Victor assured her, "and I promise you'll have every resource at your disposal to uncover the truth." As they approached her neighborhood, Maggie's phone rang, Jenkins calling again. "Boss, we've got a situation," he said without preamble. "Bradford's been found." "Where?" "Floating in the harbor. Boston PD just pulled him out. Gunshot wound to the head, execution style." Maggie's blood ran cold. "Meridian tying up loose ends." "Looks that way. And there's more. His apartment was torched about an hour ago. Complete loss." "They're eliminating evidence," Maggie concluded. "Anything connecting Bradford to Reynolds or Meridian." "There's one more thing," Jenkins added grimly. "Boston PD found something on the body, an envelope addressed to Mrs. Harrington." That's you, as of about an hour ago. Victor, hearing Maggie's side of the conversation, had already changed direction, heading toward the harbor. What was in the envelope? Maggie asked, dread pooling in her stomach. A wedding card, Jenkins replied, with a message inside. Congratulations on the new arrangement. Family reunions can be so illuminating. Looking forward to catching up soon. Elizabeth Grant knew about the wedding. She was watching them, sending a clear message that she understood exactly what they were doing and why. They're ahead of us, Maggie said to Victor as she ended the call. Grant knows about our marriage, knows it's connected to the trust conditions. She's letting us know she's watching. Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel, and eliminating anyone who might connect her to the data theft. Bradford was just a pawn, Maggie concluded, used and discarded when he served his purpose. They arrived at the harbor to find police lights reflecting off the dark water. Bradford's body had already been removed, but crime scene technicians still worked the area, photographing evidence and collecting samples. Maggie approached the detective in charge, a weathered veteran named Diaz, whom she knew from her FBI days. Sullivan, he greeted her with a nod. Heard you might show up. Didn't expect to be saying congratulations along with briefing you on a murder. News traveled fast in Boston law enforcement circles. Word gets around, Maggie acknowledged. What can you tell me about Bradford? Professional hit, Diaz confirmed. Single shot, close range, body dumped, no witnesses, no cameras in this section of the harbor. Very clean, very deliberate. The envelope addressed to me, found in his jacket pocket, sealed, untouched by water, meant to be found. Diaz studied her with professional interest. Want to tell me why someone's sending you wedding cards via corpse? It's complicated, Maggie hedged. It always is with you. Sullivan, Diaz sighed. Just tell me if this is going to bring more bodies to my jurisdiction. It was a fair question, one Maggie couldn't answer honestly. We're taking precautions, she said instead. Diaz clearly wasn't satisfied, but knew better than to press. The card's been processed for evidence. You can take it with you, for all the good it will do. Professionally printed, no fingerprints, no DNA. After collecting the card and reviewing the scene, Maggie rejoined Victor, who had been observing from a distance. We need to accelerate our timeline, she said without preamble. Bradford's murder confirms Meridian is cleaning house. They've gotten what they needed from the data theft and are eliminating connections. Victor nodded grimly, which means they are moving to the next phase of whatever they're planning. And so are we, Maggie decided. Starting tonight, we make this marriage look real. I'll move essential items to your house tomorrow. We establish the public narrative immediately. You're suggesting actually living together? Victor looked surprised. I'm suggesting we present a united front, Maggie clarified. Whoever killed Bradford and sent this message is watching us, evaluating. We need to appear genuine while we investigate. Victor considered this, then nodded. Agreed, but we maintain the separate arrangements we discussed. Of course, Maggie assured him. This is still a professional arrangement. As they left the harbor, the weight of their commitment settled more heavily. What had begun as an unusual business proposal had escalated into something far more dangerous, a direct challenge to people willing to kill to protect their secrets. Maggie studied the wedding card with its ominous message. Elizabeth Grant wasn't just taunting them. She was declaring her position in the game they'd all begun playing. The reference to family reunions suggested personal motivation beyond professional objectives. This just got significantly more complicated, Maggie observed. Welcome to married life, Mrs. Harrington, Victor replied with grim humor. For better or worse, indeed. The drive to Victor's home in Brookline was silent, both of them processing the implications of Bradford's murder and Grant's message. The winding driveway led to a modern mansion set back from the road glass, in stone with clean lines and strategic lighting that highlighted the architectural features while maintaining security. Home sweet home, Victor said as the garage door closed behind them. At least for now. As Maggie stepped into the house that would be her temporary residence, she felt a strange disconnect between the domestic setting and the dangerous investigation they were undertaking. Designer furniture, museum-quality art, and state-of-the-art technology created a space that was impressive but impersonal, much like the man who owned it. Guest suite is on the second floor, east wing, Victor explained as he led her through the house. Complete privacy, separate bathroom, sitting area. My room is in the west wing. You won't even know I'm here most of the time. Eternally, the arrangement was exactly what they discussed, separate lives under one roof to maintain the appearance of marriage while preserving professional boundaries. Yet as Maggie surveyed what would be her home for the foreseeable future, she couldn't shake the feeling that the lines between professional and personal were already blurring in ways neither of them had anticipated. This will work, she said, more to herself than to Victor. He must have heard the uncertainty in her voice because he paused at the foot of the stairs, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Maggie, he said quietly, we can still call this off. Find another way. But they both knew there wasn't another way, not one that would give them access to the resources they needed in time to stop whatever Reynolds and Grant were planning. No, Maggie replied firmly. We proceed as agreed. Reynolds has already taken too much from both of us. I won't let him take more. Victor held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Then welcome home, Mrs. Harrington. Let's hope we both survive the honeymoon. The dark humor might have been inappropriate under normal circumstances, but nothing about their situation was normal. As Maggie followed Victor up the stairs to her new temporary life, she wondered what James would think of the path she'd chosen, a marriage of convenience to a man she barely knew, in pursuit of truth and justice that had eluded her for 5 years. I'm getting closer. James, she thought. Wherever this leads, I will find the truth. I promise you that. It was a vow perhaps more sincere than the ones she'd exchanged with Victor before Judge Blackwood hours earlier. A promise to the dead that would shape her actions among the living in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Dawn broke over Boston Harbor as Maggie completed her morning run, the rhythm of her footfalls on the pavement matching the steady cadence of her thoughts. 3 weeks into her marriage of convenience with Victor Harrington, and already the lines between performance and reality were beginning to blur. She slowed to a walk as she approached the imposing gates of Victor's Brookline estate, acknowledging the security guard with a nod. The man one of Jenkins' carefully vetted team responded with a respectful, "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington," the title still jarring to her ears. Inside, the house was quiet. Victor typically rose early, but he'd been working late in his home lab, making progress on the encryption technology now that the trust funds had been released. Their paths crossed with careful politeness, two professionals maintaining the boundaries of their arrangement while presenting a united front to the outside world. Maggie showered and changed, reviewing the day's schedule on her tablet. The investigation into Bradford's murder had stalled Boston PD, finding no forensic evidence beyond the wedding card, exactly as a professional hit would ensure. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Grant had disappeared, vanishing from her New York apartment the day after the murder. As Maggie descended the stairs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee drew her to the kitchen, where she found Victor already dressed for the office, reading reports at the island counter. "Morning," he greeted her, sliding a mug toward her without looking up. "Jenkins sent the airport surveillance footage. Grant met with someone at Logan 3 days before Bradford was killed." Maggie accepted the coffee prepared exactly as she liked it. She noted and examined the grainy image on Victor's tablet. 2 figures in the airport parking garage, faces mostly obscured from the camera. "That's definitely Grant," she confirmed, recognizing the posture and profile of Victor's former sister-in-law. The other person, male, approximately 6 feet tall, athletic build. Victor enlarged the image. No clear identification, but the body language suggests they know each other well. Maggie studied the way the man stood close to Grant, his hand touching her elbow in a gesture that implied intimacy. "Lover-handler," Possibly both, Victor replied grimly. Reynolds is known for using personal connections to maintain loyalty. The suggestion hung between them that Grant's betrayal might extend beyond professional motivation into emotional territory. Victor's expression remained neutral, but Maggie had learned to read the subtle tension in his jaw that indicated deeper distress. You're thinking about Catherine, she observed quietly. Victor looked up, surprise briefly crossing his features. 3 weeks of close proximity had made them more attuned to each other than either would admit. Yes, he acknowledged. I keep wondering if Elizabeth was already working for Reynolds when Catherine was ill. If their relationship was just another manipulation. Not everything is an operation, Victor, Maggie said gently. Some connections are genuine, even in our line of work. The irony of this statement made by a woman in a fraudulent marriage wasn't lost on either of them. Victor's slight smile acknowledged the contradiction. Speaking of connections, he said, changing the subject. Judge Blackwood called. The Trust Committee is hosting a reception this weekend to welcome you to the Harrington family. Attendance is non-negotiable if we want the trust funds to continue flowing. Maggie sighed. More performance art. I did warn you about the social obligations, Victor reminded her. The Trust Committee takes family dynamics seriously. I'll manage, Maggie assured him. Though I should warn you that my small talk skills are limited to weather, sports, and interrogation techniques. Not necessarily in that order. Victor's laugh was unexpected, a rich, genuine sound that momentarily transformed his usually guarded expression. I suspect the latter might actually be useful with some of the committee members. The moment of levity was interrupted by Maggie's phone alerting her to an incoming message. Her expression darkened as she read it. What is it? Victor asked, immediately alert to the shift in her demeanor. Someone sent a package to my old office, Maggie replied, showing him the message from Jenkins. Addressed to Mrs. Harrington. Security protocols flagged it as suspicious. Victor was already standing. Business forgotten. We need to go. Now. The drive to Sullivan Security's downtown office was tense, both of them considering the implications of another message from Grant or Reynolds. Boston traffic crawled with maddening slowness, each red light an exercise in forced patience. You think it's from the same source as the card, Victor asked, deftly maneuvering through a gap in traffic. The timing suggests it, Maggie replied, reviewing Jenkins' preliminary security assessment on her phone. Package approximately 12 by 10 inches, delivered by courier service. Return address is a vacant lot in Cambridge. Professional, Victor noted, like Bradford's murder. Exactly. When they arrived, Jenkins had already established a security perimeter, clearing non-essential personnel from the building. The package sat in an isolation room, examined by remote cameras while a bomb technician in protective gear prepared to open it. No explosives detected, Jenkins reported as they observed through reinforced glass. No biological or chemical agents according to preliminary scans, but something's inside dense, metal or composite material. Open it, Maggie instructed. The technician carefully cut the packaging tape and lifted the box flaps. Inside, nestled in packing material, was a small bronze statuette, a chess piece. It's a knight, Victor observed, his voice tight with recognition. The technician carefully removed the piece, revealing a folded note beneath. Using gloved hands, he opened it to display the message for the cameras. Your move, Margaret. The game continues where it began. 15 years ago, Maggie glanced at Victor, whose face had gone pale. Afghanistan, he said quietly. That's where this started 15 years ago in Afghanistan. The operation where your team was ambushed, Maggie confirmed. The one James was providing intelligence for. Victor nodded grimly. The night before the raid, Reynolds hosted a gathering at the forward operating base. Officers, intelligence personnel. He had a custom chess set, bronze pieces representing different military units. Knights for Delta operators. A taunt, then, Maggie concluded. Reynolds letting us know he remembers that connection. Not just a taunt, Victor corrected. A message. He's acknowledging our investigation and challenging us directly. The implications were significant. If Reynolds was openly acknowledging their pursuit, it meant he either wasn't concerned about what they might discover or was confident they couldn't prove anything. Have the piece and note processed for evidence, Maggie instructed Jenkins. Full forensic workup, though I doubt they'll find anything useful. After the package had been secured, Maggie and Victor retreated to her private office to process the development. Why now, Maggie wondered aloud. Why engage directly after years of operating in the shadows? Victor leaned against the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. Because something's changed. The encryption technology, our marriage, something has forced his hand. Or he's trying to distract us, Maggie suggested. While Meridian moves forward with whatever they're planning for your technology, Victor turned to face her, his expression hardening with resolve. Then we need to change the game. Stop reacting and start acting. What do you propose? A direct approach. Reynolds is hosting a fundraiser for the Meridian Foundation next week. Wealthy donors. Political connections. High security. We should attend. Maggie raised an eyebrow. Walk straight into the lion's den. That seems unnecessarily risky. It's the last thing he'd expect, Victor argued. And it gives us a chance to observe him in his element, possibly identify other Meridian operatives. And if he recognizes the provocation for what it is, then we learn something from his reaction, Victor replied. Reynolds is careful, controlled. If we can push him off balance, he might reveal something useful. The strategy was bold, aggressive, and distinctly personal in a way that made Maggie uneasy. This isn't just about the encryption technology anymore, is it? Victor held her gaze. It never was. Maggie. Not entirely. The admission hung between them, shifting the dynamic of their arrangement. This wasn't just a business partnership with mutual benefits. It was a shared mission with deeply personal stakes for both of them. All right, Maggie agreed finally. We attend the fundraiser, but we do it my way, fully prepared, with backup and multiple exit strategies. Understood. As they left Sullivan's security together, Maggie felt the weight of what they were undertaking. Reynolds' chess piece wasn't just a taunt, it was an invitation to a game with rules only he fully understood. A game that had already claimed lives, including possibly James's. If we're doing this, she said as they reached the car, then we need to be honest with each other. Completely honest. No more selective information sharing. Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Agreed. Tonight, after the trust committee reception, I'll tell you everything I know about Reynolds, Afghanistan, and the Fox. And I'll share what I've learned about James's final mission, Maggie countered. Everything on the table. The commitment felt significant, a deeper level of trust than their legal arrangement required. As they drove back to Victor's house, Maggie found herself wondering when exactly their professional partnership had begun evolving into something more complex, more personal. The trust committee reception that evening was held at Judge Blackwood's Beacon Hill home, an elegant gathering of Boston's old money and influence. Maggie wore a simple black dress that Eleanor had insisted was appropriate for a new bride's first formal appearance, while Victor looked distinguished in a tailored suit that complemented her outfit without obvious coordination. Ready for this? He asked as they approached the imposing townhouse, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks of public appearances. As ready as I'll ever be for an evening of scrutiny by people who believe we're madly in love, Maggie replied with dry humor. Victor's smile was warm, his voice lowering so only she could hear. Just think of it as an undercover operation. You infiltrated terrorist cells for the Bureau. Surely Boston's society can't be more intimidating. You'd be surprised, Maggie muttered, but found herself relaxing slightly at his attempt to ease her tension. Inside, Judge Blackwood greeted them with obvious pleasure, presenting the newlyweds to assembled guests with the pride of someone who felt personally responsible for their union. Maggie maintained her professional smile as she was introduced to committee members, Victor's business associates, and family connections, all watching with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. "Margaret, my dear," cooed an elderly woman Victor had introduced as his godmother, Elaine Winters. "You must tell us how you managed to capture our confirmed bachelor. We had quite given up hope of Victor ever marrying again after dear Catherine." The direct question momentarily caught Maggie off guard. They had established a cover story, of course, but the personal nature of the inquiry felt invasive. "I don't think either of us was looking for a relationship," Maggie replied carefully. "We connected first through our professional interests, and I was smart enough to recognize when life offered a second chance at happiness," Victor finished, his arm sliding around her waist with practiced ease. The gesture felt protective rather than possessive, and Maggie found herself leaning into his embrace with surprising naturalness. "Well, it's wonderful to see Victor smiling again," Elaine declared. "Catherine would have approved, I'm certain." Victor's expression flickered briefly. Pain, guilt, something unreadable before his social mask returned. "Thank you, Elaine. That means a great deal." As the evening progressed, Maggie observed Victor with new attention. He moved through the social gathering with practiced charm, but she noticed the subtle tells of genuine emotion beneath the performance, the way his smile tightened at mentions of his late wife, how his posture shifted when discussing his children, the momentary shadows that crossed his features when Afghanistan was obliquely referenced by a former military colleague. For her part, Maggie found the role of devoted wife surprisingly manageable. She answered questions about her security business with professional confidence, deflected inquiries about future family plans with diplomatic vagueness, and maintained physical proximity to Victor that suggested comfortable intimacy without inappropriate displays. "You're remarkably good at this," Victor murmured during a moment alone, handing her a glass of champagne as they stood near the terrace doors. "I almost believe we're happily married myself." "FBI undercover training," Maggie replied, though the ease of their interaction had surprised her as well. "Though I admit, the role is less challenging than I anticipated." Something shifted in Victor's expression interest. Perhaps, or cautious hope. "Is that so?" Before Maggie could clarify her meaning, Judge Blackwood approached with a silver-haired man she didn't recognize. "Victor, Margaret," Blackwood greeted them. "I'd like to introduce an old colleague of mine from the federal bench, Judge Thomas Reynolds, Lawrence's brother." Maggie felt Victor tense beside her, his hand finding hers in what appeared to be an affectionate gesture, but was clearly a warning. Thomas Reynolds bore a striking resemblance to his more infamous brother, the same aristocratic features and penetrating gaze, though lacking the ruthless edge Maggie had observed in photographs of Lawrence. "A pleasure to meet you both," Reynolds said smoothly, shaking their hands. "My brother sends his regrets that he couldn't attend this evening. He's quite tied up with the Foundation's annual fundraiser preparations." "Please convey our understanding," Victor replied with perfect civility, though Maggie could feel the tension radiating from him. "Perhaps we'll have an opportunity to see him at the event next week." Reynolds' eyebrows rose slightly. "You're attending. I wasn't aware Meridian Foundation was on your charitable roster." "Victor, Margaret has encouraged me to expand my philanthropic interests," Victor explained, squeezing Maggie's hand. "Building bridges rather than walls." "How admirable," Reynolds observed, his gaze shifting to Maggie with new interest. "And remarkably timely, given recent developments." The implication hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement that this was no coincidence, that messages had been received and understood on both sides. "We find that timing is everything in both business and personal matters," Maggie replied smoothly. "Wouldn't you agree, Judge Reynolds?" "Indeed, Mrs. Harrington." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be sure to tell Lawrence you're looking forward to reconnecting. He always appreciates the opportunity to engage with old colleagues." After Reynolds departed, Victor guided Maggie onto the terrace, where the cool evening air provided both privacy and relief from the stuffiness of the reception. That was deliberate, Maggie observed quietly. Blackwood introducing us to Reynolds' brother. He's testing us. Victor nodded, his expression grim. William has always been perceptive. He suspects our marriage isn't entirely what it appears to be. Does he know about your history with Lawrence Reynolds? Not the details, but he knows there's bad blood. Victor leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out over the garden. William served with my father in Vietnam. Their generation believed in keeping personal and professional conflicts separate. He probably thinks I'm being stubborn by maintaining the feud with Reynolds. Maggie studied his profile in the soft lighting from the house. And are you being stubborn? Victor turned to face her, his expression suddenly vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. Is it stubborn to want justice for men who died because someone sold information to the enemy? Is it stubborn to need the truth about why my team walked into an ambush that was waiting specifically for us? The raw emotion in his voice resonated with Maggie's own unresolved grief. No, she said softly. It's not stubborn. It's necessary. Their eyes held for a long moment, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever had brought them together, convenience, mutual benefit, parallel quests for truth, had evolved into something deeper: shared purpose, shared pain, shared determination. The moment was interrupted by Judge Blackwood joining them on the terrace. Ah, the newlyweds escaping for a moment alone, he observed with knowing amusement. Forgive the intrusion, but I wanted a private word before you departed. Victor straightened, his professional demeanor returning. Of course. William, what is it? Blackwood glanced back toward the reception, ensuring they weren't overheard. Thomas Reynolds asking to be introduced wasn't coincidental. He approached me specifically when he saw you arrive. I suspected as much, Victor acknowledged. What you may not know, Blackwood continued, his voice lowering further, is that Thomas has been making inquiries about your marriage. Discreet ones, through mutual acquaintances. Maggie felt her investigator's instincts sharpen. What kind of inquiries? Timeline, circumstances, background on you specifically. Margaret? Blackwood's shrewd eyes assessed her. Nothing overtly suspicious, but unusual given the limited connection between our social circles. Lawrence putting his brother to work, Victor concluded, gathering intelligence. Possibly, Blackwood agreed. Though to what end, I couldn't say, but I thought you should know. He hesitated, then added, Victor, whatever game you're playing with the Reynolds brothers, be careful. Lawrence may have left government service, but his influence remains considerable. Thank you for the warning, William, Victor said sincerely. After Blackwood returned to his guests, Maggie and Victor exchanged a look of mutual understanding. We need to accelerate our timeline, Maggie said quietly. If Reynolds is actively investigating our relationship, he's suspicious of our intentions regarding the foundation event. Or he's concerned about what we might already know, Victor suggested. Either way, we've gotten his attention. The question is whether that's an advantage or a liability, Maggie mused. They departed the reception shortly after, maintaining the appearance of a couple eager for privacy while their minds raced with the implications of this new development. The drive home was quiet, both lost in thought until Victor broke the silence. I think it's time for that complete honesty we discussed, he said as they approached his estate. About Afghanistan. Reynolds, all of it. Maggie nodded. Yes. No more partial truths or strategic omissions. Inside the house, they moved by unspoken agreement to Victor's study, a space they'd rarely shared despite living under the same roof for weeks. Victor poured 2 glasses of scotch, handing one to Maggie before settling into a leather chair opposite her. 15 years ago, he began without preamble. My Delta team was assigned to a classified operation in Afghanistan, a raid on a compound suspected of housing financial records for terrorist networks operating across the Pakistan border. The intelligence came through CIA channels, vetted by the station chief. Lawrence Reynolds, Maggie supplied. Victor nodded grimly. The mission parameters were unusually specific: timing, approach vectors, target identification. In retrospect, it was too perfect, too precise. A setup, Maggie concluded. We realized it too late. Victor's voice tightened with the memory. The compound was waiting for us, not random fighters, but a professional ambush team. 3 of my men died in the first 30 seconds. 2 more were critically wounded. I took shrapnel in the leg and shoulder, but managed to get the survivors to the extraction point. He paused, taking a drink of scotch. Maggie remained silent, giving him space to continue at his own pace. Afterward, the official investigation concluded it was the intelligence failure. Bad information, unfortunate timing. But I knew something wasn't right. The ambush was too precise, too targeted. Someone had sold us out. And you suspected Reynolds, Maggie prompted when he fell silent. Victor's expression hardened. Not initially, but then I discovered that one of the intelligence analysts had filed concerns about the reliability of the source, concerns that Reynolds had overruled. That analyst was your husband, James. The revelation hit Maggie like a physical blow, though she'd suspected this connection since Jenkins' research into Afghanistan. James flagged problems with the intelligence, and Reynolds ignored him. More than ignored, Victor corrected. He actively suppressed the concerns. By the time I discovered this, Reynolds had already transitioned to the private sector, starting Meridian. The official channels for pursuing the matter had closed. So you began your own investigation, Maggie guessed. Looking for proof that Reynolds had deliberately compromised the mission? Victor nodded. I started connecting dots, following money trails, tracking Reynolds' contacts, piecing together a pattern of information sales that stretched back years. Someone high in intelligence circles had been selling operational details to various buyers, domestic and foreign. Someone codenamed the Fox. And you believe that's Reynolds, Maggie concluded. Everything pointed to him, Victor confirmed. The access, the timeline, the financial patterns. But I could never find the smoking gun, the definitive proof that would stand up in court or in front of a congressional committee. He set down his glass, leaning forward with intensity. 5 years ago, I came close. I identified a financial transaction linked to Reynolds that coincided with a compromised operation in Eastern Europe. I shared that information with someone I trusted in the intelligence community, someone who had the resources to investigate further. Maggie felt her heart rate accelerate. James, she whispered. Victor's expression confirmed her suspicion. Your husband contacted me 3 weeks before his death, said he'd found something that might connect Reynolds to multiple intelligence breaches, including the Afghanistan ambush. We arranged to meet, but he died before that could happen, Maggie finished, the pieces finally aligning. His routine operation that went wrong. I've always believed Reynolds discovered James was investigating him and arranged the ambush that killed him, Victor said quietly. Just as he arranged the one that killed my men in Afghanistan. The revelation hung in the air between them, the full weight of their connected histories settling into place. For 5 years, Maggie had accepted the official explanation of James's death, never knowing how close he'd come to uncovering the truth about Afghanistan, about Reynolds, about the Fox. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? She asked, her voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. Would you have believed me? Victor countered. A stranger claiming conspiracy theories about your husband's death. Or would you have dismissed me as a grieving, vengeful man looking for someone to blame? The assessment was fair. Without the evidence they'd accumulated over the past weeks, without seeing Reynolds' actions firsthand, she might well have rejected Victor's theories. So, our marriage arrangement, Maggie said slowly, it was never just about the trust funds and the encryption technology. It was about continuing the investigation. James started the one that got him killed. Yes, Victor admitted. I needed someone with your skills, your connections, and your personal motivation to help uncover the truth. The trust deadline and the technology provided the practical framework. But the core mission has always been exposing Reynolds as the Fox. The honesty was both refreshing and unsettling. Their entire arrangement had been built on partial truths, each revealing only what served their immediate purposes. Yet Maggie couldn't summon real anger at the manipulation, not when it had brought her closer to understanding James's death than 5 years of private grief had accomplished. "Your turn," Victor said quietly. "What do you know about James's final mission?" Maggie took a steadying breath, organizing thoughts she'd kept private for years. The official report stated that James was providing intelligence support for a CIA extraction operation in Belarus. A high-value defector needed transport across the border. The team was ambushed at the rendezvous point, and James was killed covering their escape. She reached for her scotch, taking a measured sip before continuing. But there were inconsistencies from the beginning. James had been researching financial transactions through Swiss banks' work that had nothing to do with Belarus or defectors. He'd been pulling old case files from Afghanistan, reviewing intelligence assessments from operations that had gone wrong. He was building a case against the Fox, Victor suggested. "Without telling me," Maggie confirmed, the old hurt resurfacing. "He was working off books, outside normal channels. The night before he left for that final mission, he locked something in our home safe, told me if anything happened to him, I should deliver the contents to his section chief, unopened." Victor leaned forward. "And did you?" "I tried," Maggie replied grimly. "But when I opened the safe after receiving news of his death, it was empty. Someone had accessed it while I was at the bureau receiving the official notification. Professional job. No evidence left behind. Reynolds' people," Victor concluded, "removing whatever evidence James had compiled. That's when I knew the official story was incomplete," Maggie acknowledged. "But without proof, without James's research, I had nowhere to start. The bureau closed ranks, classified the details, offered condolences and a flag." The familiar bitterness tinged her words. 5 years of unanswered questions, of bureaucratic stonewalling, of being told to accept the official narrative and move forward. "And now," Victor asked softly. Maggie met his gaze directly. "Now I believe we're finally on the right track. Reynolds' reaction to our marriage, the chess piece, his brother investigating us, he's concerned about what we might know or discover. Which means we need to press that advantage," Victor concluded. "The foundation fundraiser gives us an opportunity to observe Reynolds directly, possibly identify other Meridian operatives connected to these operations. And to draw out Elizabeth Grant," Maggie added. "She's the wild card in all this, the personal connection to you through Catherine, the professional tie to Reynolds, the apparent emotional involvement with this mystery man at the airport." Victor nodded, his expression resolute. "So we proceed with the plan, attend the fundraiser, present ourselves as the happy couple, and observe Reynolds in his element. While Jenkins and his team use the distraction to access Meridian's secure servers," Maggie continued, outlining the operation they'd begun developing earlier. "If there's evidence connecting Reynolds to Afghanistan or to James's death, it will be in their internal communications." The strategy was taking shape, a coordinated approach, using their public appearance as cover for a more targeted intelligence gathering operation. It was professional, pragmatic, and precisely the kind of mission Maggie had excelled at during her FBI career. Yet as she and Victor continued discussing operational details into the night, Maggie became increasingly aware of how their dynamic had shifted. The professional distance they'd maintained in the early weeks had given way to something more complex, a partnership built on shared purpose and growing trust. When they finally concluded their planning near midnight, Victor walked Maggie to the base of the stairs that led to their separate wings of the house, a gentlemanly gesture that had become part of their evening routine. "Thank you," he said unexpectedly, "for listening, for believing, for committing to this. We both want the same thing." "Victor," Maggie replied, "the truth. Justice for those we've lost." Victor hesitated, something unspoken in his expression. "Is that all we want?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither had acknowledged. Their arrangement had been explicitly professional, their partnership strategic, yet something had changed in these weeks of shared purpose and proximity, something neither had anticipated. "I don't know," Maggie admitted honestly. "I haven't wanted anything beyond justice for a very long time." Victor nodded, accepting the ambiguity of her response. "Good night, Maggie." "Good night, Victor." As she climbed the stairs to her separate suite, Maggie found herself contemplating not just the mission ahead, but the unexpected complexity of her feelings. She had entered this arrangement with clear professional objectives, finding the truth about James's death, securing justice for his sacrifice. She hadn't anticipated how working closely with Victor, sharing his home and his quest for answers, would affect her personally. In her room, Maggie stood at the window overlooking the moonlit gardens of the estate. The wedding band on her finger caught the light a prop in their elaborate deception that sometimes felt heavier than its physical weight would suggest. Not because she resented wearing it, but because its significance had begun to shift from symbol of their business arrangement to something more complicated. Focus on the mission, she reminded herself firmly. Reynolds, Grant, Meridian, the encryption technology, those are the priorities. Yet as she prepared for bed, Maggie couldn't entirely dismiss the question Victor had posed. Is that all we want for 5 years? Justice for James had been her driving purpose. The possibility of wanting something beyond that connection, companionship, a future not defined by the past, was both tempting and terrifying. The Meridian Foundation fundraiser was scheduled for Saturday evening at the Langham Hotel, one of Boston's most prestigious venues. The guest list included corporate leaders, political figures, and philanthropic heavyweights, a gathering of influence and wealth that Reynolds cultivated carefully for Meridian's benefit. In the days leading up to the event, Maggie and Victor refined their approach while Jenkins prepared the technical aspects of the operation. Sullivan Security would provide supplemental staff for the event, a legitimate contract that gave Jenkins and his team access to the hotel's security systems and service areas. "You're sure about this?" Maggie asked Victor on Saturday afternoon as they made final preparations. "Once we walk into that ballroom, Reynolds will know exactly what we're doing." "He already knows we're investigating him," Victor replied, adjusting his cufflinks platinum with subtle tracking devices embedded by Jenkins' tech specialist. The chess piece made that clear. "This is about showing him we're not intimidated." Maggie nodded, surveying her reflection in the full-length mirror. The midnight blue evening gown Eleanor had insisted she purchase for the occasion was undeniably elegant, though more formal than anything she'd worn in years. Her dark hair was swept up, minimal jewelry drawing attention to the clean lines of the dress rather than accessories. "You look beautiful," Victor said quietly from the doorway of her room, his expression admiring without being presumptuous. "Thank you," Maggie replied, momentarily disarmed by the sincerity in his voice. "You clean up rather well yourself." Victor in formal attire was undeniably striking, the classic black tuxedo, emphasizing his athletic build and silver-streaked dark hair. For a moment, Maggie allowed herself to appreciate the sight purely as a woman rather than a professional partner. "Shall we?" Victor extended his arm, the picture of a devoted husband escorting his wife to a social engagement. "Let's go catch a traitor," Maggie replied with grim determination, taking his arm. The drive to the Langham was quiet, both mentally preparing for the performance ahead. They would be under constant observation, not just by Reynolds and his associates, but by Boston society curious about Victor Harrington's unexpected second marriage. "Remember," Maggie said as they approached the hotel, "Reynolds will be watching for any signs that our relationship isn't genuine. We need to be convincing." "I'm not concerned about that part," Victor replied, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm. "Whatever else our arrangement entails, I think we've proven we work well together." The simple touch and quiet confidence steadied Maggie's nerves. Whatever had brought them to this point, they were partners in this mission, equals with shared purpose and growing trust. The Langham's ballroom was transformed for the occasion, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over elegantly decorated tables. A small orchestra playing classical pieces. Waitstaff circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Security was subtle but thorough, with earpiece-wearing professionals positioned strategically throughout the space. Maggie noted Jenkins in position near a service entrance, his formal attire identifying him as part of the security team while concealing his true purpose. They exchanged the briefest nod before Maggie returned her attention to the gathering. Lawrence Reynolds, 2 o'clock, Victor murmured, guiding her toward the center of the room. Speaking with the silver-haired woman in red, Maggie observed their target without obvious scrutiny. At 62, Lawrence Reynolds maintained the fit physique and commanding presence that had served him well in intelligence circles. Distinguished rather than conventionally handsome, with penetrating eyes that missed nothing, he embodied the archetype of the calculating spy master. "He's seen us," Maggie noted, catching the moment Reynolds' gaze flickered in their direction. "Good," Victor replied, his hands settling at the small of her back. "Let him make the first move." They circulated through the gathering with practiced ease, greeting acquaintances and making appropriate small talk while maintaining awareness of Reynolds' position. The dance of surveillance and counter-surveillance was familiar to Maggie from her FBI days, the careful positioning, the strategic conversations, the constant assessment of sightlines and exits. An hour into the event, Reynolds finally approached, timing his arrival as Victor and Maggie stood alone near one of the elaborate floral arrangements. "Victor Harrington," he greeted with practiced cordiality. "What an unexpected pleasure. And this must be the new Mrs. Harrington I've heard so much about." "Lawrence," Victor acknowledged with equal false warmth. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Margaret. Maggie, this is Lawrence Reynolds, our host this evening." Maggie offered her hand, maintaining poised confidence. "Mr. Reynolds, your brother mentioned you were sorry to miss Judge Blackwood's reception." "Thomas mentioned meeting you both," Reynolds confirmed, his assessment of Maggie subtle but thorough. "He was quite impressed. Said you had a certain presence that reminded him of his days on the federal bench. An investigator's instinct. He called it." The observation was deliberately pointed in acknowledgement of Maggie's FBI background and a signal that Reynolds had indeed been gathering information on her. "High praise from a federal judge," Maggie replied smoothly, "though these days my investigations are strictly private sector." "As are mine," Reynolds smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Though old habits die hard, don't they? The instinct to look beneath surfaces, to question convenient narratives?" "Some narratives are worth questioning," Victor interjected, his tone light despite the tension Maggie could feel radiating from him. "Particularly when they involve old friends and unexpected transitions." Reynolds' smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed, speaking of transitions, congratulations on your marriage. Quite sudden, I understand. A whirlwind romance." "When you know, you know," Maggie replied, leaning slightly into Victor's side in a gesture of affection that appeared natural despite being calculated, though I'm sure Victor's trust committee would have preferred a longer courtship. The direct reference to the trust conditions was bold a signal to Reynolds that they were aware of his interest in Victor's financial situation and company control. "Ah yes, the famous Harrington Trust," Reynolds acknowledged. "Quite the inheritance at stake. I understand the encryption technology you're developing requires significant capital investment. Fortunate timing, your marriage." "Very fortunate," Victor agreed, his arm tightening slightly around Maggie's waist. "In more ways than one." The subtext was clear to all three participants in this careful verbal dance. Reynolds knew about the trust conditions and the marriage timing. Victor and Maggie knew he knew, and everyone was choosing their words with precision, searching for advantage. "I hope you'll both enjoy the evening," Reynolds said, preparing to move on to other guests. "The foundation does important work with veterans' families. Something I know is close to your heart, Margaret, given your late husband's service." The mention of James was deliberate, a power move designed to unsettle Maggie, to remind her that Reynolds had investigated her background thoroughly. "Very close," Maggie confirmed, maintaining her composure despite the surge of anger the reference provoked. "James believes strongly in accountability. In truth, values I continue to uphold." Reynolds' expression flickered briefly, surprise at her directness, perhaps, or recognition of the challenge beneath her words. Admirable principles, he said finally. Though truth can be such a subjective concept, particularly in our line of work, what seems true from one perspective often looks quite different from another. Some truths are absolute, Victor countered, his voice hardening slightly. Like betrayal, loyalty, responsibility for the consequences of one's actions. The pretense of social pleasantries was wearing thin. The real conversation happening in subtext and implication. Reynolds glanced between them, his calculation almost visible behind his practiced smile. Philosophy at a charity fundraiser, he observed lightly. How refreshing. We must continue this conversation another time. Perhaps over chess. I remember you were quite the strategist. Victor. The reference to the chess piece was unmistakable, an acknowledgement of the message received in the game underway. I'd welcome the opportunity, Victor replied. It's been too long since we properly matched wits. Reynolds nodded, seemingly satisfied with the exchange. Enjoy your evening. And Margaret, do visit the silent auction. There's a rather interesting item I think might interest you, a first edition of Intelligence Operations in Contested Environments. Your husband had a copy, as I recall. With that parting shot, another deliberate reference to James that confirmed Reynolds' knowledge of his activities, he moved away to greet other guests, leaving Maggie and Victor with the unsettling certainty that their adversary was fully aware of their investigation and untroubled by it. He's confident, Maggie observed quietly as they maintained their poised exterior. Too confident for someone under scrutiny, which means he either has nothing to hide or believes his position is unassailable. Victor concluded. Or he's laying a trap, Maggie added, her instincts on high alert. That mention of James's book wasn't coincidental. He's signaling that he knows exactly why we're here. Before Victor could respond, Maggie's attention caught on a familiar figure entering the ballroom, a woman in her mid-40s with ash blonde hair and striking features that Maggie recognized from photographs. Elizabeth Grant just arrived, she murmured to Victor. 10 o'clock, green dress. Victor tensed beside her, his gaze finding his former sister-in-law across the crowded room. And she's not alone. The man accompanying Grant was tall and distinguished, approximately Victor's age, with military bearing and watchful eyes that surveyed the room with professional assessment. That's him, Victor said quietly. The man from the airport surveillance footage. Before they could discuss further, Maggie's earpiece disguised as a decorative hair accessory activated with Jenkins' voice. Team in position, he reported discreetly. Commencing server access now. Estimated window 20 minutes. Maggie acknowledged with a subtle touch to her earring, then turned to Victor. We need to maintain Reynolds' attention for the next 20 minutes. Keep him focused on us while the team works. Victor nodded, understanding the strategy. Follow my lead. He guided Maggie toward the dance floor where several couples were already moving to the orchestra's waltz, taking her in his arms with practiced ease. Victor led her into the dance with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. Catherine insisted on ballroom dancing lessons before our first charity gala, he explained quietly, noting Maggie's surprise at his skill. Said a CEO needed to be as comfortable in a ballroom as a boardroom. She was right, Maggie replied, following his lead with the adaptability that had served her well throughout her career, though I doubt she anticipated these particular circumstances. Victor's expression softened at the mention of his late wife. Catherine would have liked you, he said unexpectedly. She valued directness, competence, integrity, qualities you have in abundance. The personal observation caught Maggie off guard. I'm not sure how to respond to that. You don't need to, Victor assured her. Just an observation from someone who knew her well. As they moved across the dance floor, Maggie noticed Reynolds watching them from the edge of the room, his attention seemingly casual but focused. Mission accomplished, keeping their adversaries' eyes on them while Jenkins' team worked. Reynolds is monitoring us, she noted quietly. As is Grant, from the bar area. Victor nodded slightly, using the movement of the dance to survey the room without obvious scrutiny. The man with Grant, I've seen him before. Not just in the surveillance footage. Afghanistan, possibly military intelligence or contractor. The orchestra transitioned to a slower piece, requiring partners to dance closer. Victor adjusted seamlessly, his hand at the small of Maggie's back guiding her into proper position. This feels like a surveillance operation crossed with Dancing with the Stars, Maggie observed dryly, trying to lighten the tension she felt at their increased proximity. Victor's quiet laugh surprised her. An apt description? Though I suspect most dance competitions don't involve international espionage and potentially treasonous former CIA directors. You'd be surprised what happens backstage, Maggie countered, earning another genuine smile from Victor. As they continued their dance, maintaining both the appearance of a devoted couple and strategic positioning to observe Reynolds and Grant, Maggie found herself aware of unexpected details, the solid warmth of Victor's hand against hers, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way his eyes creased slightly at the corners when he smiled. Details that had nothing to do with their mission and everything to do with the man himself. Something wrong, Victor asked, noting her momentary distraction. Just considering angles, Maggie replied, not entirely truthfully. Reynolds seems too comfortable with our presence. It suggests he's either innocent or has contingency plans we haven't anticipated. Or both, Victor suggested. A man in his position would maintain plausible deniability while ensuring backup options. The dance ended, and they moved toward the silent auction displays, maintaining their cover while continuing surveillance. Jenkins' voice came through Maggie's earpiece again, his tone urgent despite the low volume. Extraction in progress, he reported, but we've triggered something. System is initiating countermeasures, Maggie acknowledged discreetly, then murmured to Victor. Complications with the server access. We may need to expedite our departure. Victor nodded, understanding the implication. If Jenkins had triggered security protocols in Meridian systems, Reynolds would be alerted soon, if he wasn't already. As if summoned by the thought, Reynolds appeared beside them at the auction display, his manner still cordial, though Maggie detected new tension in his posture. Finding anything of interest, he inquired smoothly. The Foundation has curated some unique items this year. Very unique, Maggie agreed, indicating a display case containing the book Reynolds had mentioned earlier, a rare first-edition text on intelligence operations that James had indeed owned. This particular volume brings back memories. Reynolds smiled thinly. I thought it might. Your late husband had quite the professional library, particularly his collection on counterintelligence and identifying internal security breaches. The reference was deliberate, another confirmation that Reynolds knew exactly what James had been investigating before his death. James was thorough in his research, Maggie replied, maintaining her composure despite the provocation. A quality I've always admired and emulated. A dangerous quality in certain contexts, Reynolds observed. Research can lead down unexpected paths, reveal uncomfortable truths, or expose those who prefer to operate in shadows, Victor interjected, his tone hardening slightly. Reynolds glanced between them, his calculation almost palpable. You know, I've just had the most interesting security alert from my office. It seems someone is attempting to access private servers. Remarkable coincidence. Wouldn't you say? The directness was unexpected, an abandonment of the careful verbal sparring they'd maintained thus far. Reynolds was signaling that he knew about Jenkins' operation and was unconcerned about revealing that knowledge. Technology can be so unpredictable, Maggie replied evenly. False alarms, system glitches. I'm sure your security team is well prepared for such eventualities. Extremely well prepared, Reynolds confirmed, his smile now openly predatory. In fact, I'd be concerned about anyone attempting unauthorized access. The countermeasures can be quite definitive. The threat was clear. Jenkins and his team might be in immediate danger if Meridian's security protocols included more than digital defenses. If you'll excuse us, Victor said, his hand finding Maggie's elbow in a gesture that appeared courteous but conveyed urgency. We should circulate before the dinner service begins. Of course, Reynolds agreed, his demeanor suggesting he'd achieved his objective in this exchange. Though one last observation, if I may, chess is a fascinating game not just because of the moves players make, but because of the consequences those moves trigger. The knight can jump over other pieces, move in unexpected patterns, but it remains vulnerable when isolated from supporting forces. The metaphor required no translation. Reynolds was warning them that their investigation had consequences, that they were potentially exposed without adequate support. As they moved away, Maggie activated her comm link to Jenkins. "Status report, extraction complete," Jenkins responded, his voice tight with tension. "But security teams are sweeping the service areas, moving to secondary exit now." "Acknowledged," Maggie replied. "Meet at extraction point Alpha." To Victor, she murmured, "We need to leave. Now." Reynolds knows about the server access and has security searching for Jenkins' team. Victor nodded grimly. "Through the main entrance. Anything else will look suspicious." They made their way toward the exit with practiced social grace, pausing briefly to thank their host committee members, maintaining the appearance of guests departing after making an appropriate appearance. Maggie was acutely aware of Reynolds watching their retreat, his expression suggesting neither surprise nor concern. Outside, their driver was waiting with the car. As they settled into the back seat, Maggie immediately checked her secure phone for updates from Jenkins. "They made it out," she reported with relief. "Secondary exit worked. They're en route to the safe house with the extracted data." Victor exhaled slowly, tension visibly leaving his shoulders. "Reynolds wanted us to know he was aware of the operation. That warning about countermeasures wasn't just intimidation." "No," Maggie agreed. "It was insurance. If anything happens to Jenkins or the team, we know exactly who's responsible." As the car pulled away from the Langham, Maggie found herself processing not just the operational outcome, but the unexpected dynamics of the evening. Dancing with Victor, maintaining their cover as a devoted couple, facing Reynolds together, it had all felt more natural than she'd anticipated, more genuine than a mere performance should have been. "You're quiet," Victor observed as they headed back toward his estate. "Processing," Maggie replied, then decided honesty was warranted. "Reynolds is several steps ahead of us. He knew about the server operation, knew about James's investigation, probably knows our entire strategy, yet he seemed almost amused by our efforts. Because he believes he's untouchable," Victor suggested. "After 15 years evading consequences, he's confident in his position. Or because he knows something we don't," Maggie countered. "Something that makes our investigation irrelevant or misguided." Victor considered this, his expression troubled. "You think we're missing something fundamental? I think we need to be prepared for unexpected revelations when Jenkins analyzes the server data," Maggie replied carefully. "Reynolds' confidence suggests he's not concerned about what we might find." The implication hung between them that perhaps their understanding of events, of Reynolds' role, of the connections between Afghanistan and James's death, might be incomplete or even fundamentally flawed. As they arrived at the estate, both were quiet, contemplating the evening's developments and their next steps. The house was dark and silent as they entered, the emptiness emphasizing the isolation of their position. "We should get some rest," Victor suggested as they reached the foyer. "Tomorrow will be intensive once Jenkins delivers the server data." Maggie nodded in agreement, but neither moved toward their separate wings of the house. Instead, they stood in the dimly lit entryway, the events of the evening creating an unfamiliar tension between them. "Thank you," Victor said finally, "for tonight, for all of this. I know it goes well beyond our original arrangement. We're partners in this." "Victor," Maggie replied, surprised by how true the words felt. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." Something shifted in Victor's expression. Resolve, perhaps, or decision. He stepped closer, his hand gently touching her cheek in a gesture far more intimate than their public performance had required. "Maggie," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have acknowledged weeks ago." Her heart rate accelerated unexpectedly. "What is it?" This arrangement between us, it started as convenience, strategy, mutual benefit. But for me, it's become something else. His voice was low, sincere, something I wasn't looking for or expecting. Maggie stood very still, acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his hand against her skin, of the vulnerability in his expression. "Victor, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just needed you to know that whatever began as performance has become real for me. My respect for you, my admiration, my feelings, they're genuine." The confession hung between them, altering the carefully maintained boundaries of their arrangement. Maggie found herself at a crossroads retreat to the professional parameters they'd established, or acknowledge the truth that she too had experienced a shift in her feelings toward this man who had begun as a business partner and become something much more complex. Before she could respond, her secure phone buzzed with an incoming message from Jenkins. The interruption broke the moment, returning them both to the realities of their mission. "Jenkins has completed initial analysis of the server data," she reported, scanning the message. "He's found something he says changes everything. He's coming here first thing tomorrow." Victor nodded, professional focus returning, though something in his eyes suggested the personal conversation wasn't concluded, merely postponed. "Then we should be prepared," he said. "Whatever Jenkins found, Reynolds expects us to find it. That confidence still concerns me." "Me too," Maggie admitted. "It suggests we're still playing his game rather than our own." As they finally moved toward their separate rooms, Maggie found herself contemplating not just the mission implications, but the personal revelation Victor had offered. For 5 years, she'd defined herself by her grief for James, by her quest for answers about his death. The possibility of allowing new feelings, new connections, had seemed impossible. Yet here she was, standing at the threshold of something unexpected: partnership, becoming friendship, becoming something else. Something that complicated their mission while simultaneously giving it deeper meaning. Tomorrow would bring new information, new challenges, perhaps even the answers they'd both sought for years. But tonight, Maggie found herself considering possibilities beyond justice, enclosure possibilities that included a future not defined solely by the past. 15 years of shadows and secrets, 5 years of unanswered questions, 6 months that changed everything. As Maggie stood on the terrace of the Harrington estate, watching the sunrise paint golden light across Boston Harbor, she felt the weight of truth settling around her shoulders, heavier than expected, yet somehow easier to bear now that it was no longer hers to carry alone. They had found their answers in the end, though not the ones they'd sought. The chess pieces had been rearranged, the players revealed, the game board forever altered. Justice had come, though not in the form either of them had imagined when they'd signed those marriage papers in Judge Blackwood's study all those months ago. The gold band still encircled her finger. No longer a prop, no longer a strategy, but a choice. Her choice, their choice, behind her. Victor's footsteps approached, steady and unhurried. His hand found hers, warm and certain in the cool morning air. "No regrets?" he asked, the question that had become their private ritual. Maggie smiled, turning toward the man who had begun as a means to an end and become something neither of them had dared to hope for: a second chance. Sometimes the most honest promises begin with the greatest deceptions. Sometimes the truest loves are born from convenient lies,